Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and it's time for a bit of a story. In the summer of 2020, a wide array of nerfs to numerous spells, mostly the shad spells, hit the live realm in that July. And the developers' primary rationale for nerfing these shad spells was to balance PvP. My oldest viewers, and I'm talking like when I had 50 subscribers, if any of y'all are left, will remember that I was able to successfully push from around the Night range all the way to Warlord with a glass cannon ice setup just because of Weaver's 75% shield before these nerfs. From a PvPer's perspective, these nerfs needed to happen, but when the devs began to focus on cards like Weaver and Ifrit for the first time ever, we also saw them take a look at all of the Shadows hit spells and many of the Arc 2 spells, and that's when this whole debacle began. The PvE community was understandably mad about many of their spells from the second and third arcs receiving a nerf no matter the school, and they placed the blame on the PvP community for the nerfs. And I'll say this much, as a member of the PvP community then, and as a member of the PvP community now, I am staunchly against mindlessly nerfing a lot of spells to the degree that the devs originally wanted to do. But let's make no mistake here, it is not the PvP community's fault that 3/4 of every spell acquired after the first arc got raised. That part was entirely on the developers, and both communities' anger over these nerfs should be directed at them rather than each other. Of course, back in those days, the difference between PvE and PvP still wasn't halfway as crazy as it is today. Pre-enchanted cards were still allowed, there were lots of utility TC that you could use in both modes, and you could even alpha strike in those days depending on what strat you were doing. Balancing changes back then could have reasonably been done to both modes without prioritizing one over the other, and the devs understood this, which was why the spell audit is something both communities have mostly gotten over at this point 3.5 years later. And I don't think they could have done a spell audit after Caramel came out, if I'm going to be completely honest. With all the changes that happened to PvP, I'm not so sure it could have happened afterward. The devs did nerf the mobs and bosses' health from Arc 2 onwards by 20% as a way to compensate, which of course created the whole buff into 7-pip AoE thing, since a bunch of those got buffed in the audit, but it is what it is. Sometime after the Caramel update, enchanted drain spells got buffed to where the enchant would add the full amount of damage as opposed to the half that it was before, and this was done to benefit death players in PvE, but what it created in PvP was this meta where death was king due to how Solar Surge worked at the time. In a similar fashion to what's happening today, Wraiths were outvaluing shadow hits and making PvP considerably worse due to a change made specifically for PvE. This was the first real indicator, that I know of, I wasn't playing for all of 2021 and 22, that the growing divide between PvE and PvP was starting to really become bad, and that separating the two entirely would be the better solution in the long term. Now, just the fact that they need to be separated is a very bad sign that PvP has gone in a horrible direction over the last few years. Because PvP used to be about using tools that you could use in PvE against other players, but as time has gone on, balancing the two at the same time has become infinitely harder due to how wildly different they now are. Later that year, with the Lemuria update, came the addition of Rochambeau spells, which was really the point of no return for any hope of reconciling PvE and PvP. And you know, if you're one of the 800 or so new viewers that have only just started watching me since I came back, I should tell y'all that I quit the game for nearly 3 years after the Caramel update because PvP stopped being about using PvE tools against other players, and that the game was not what I remember it being. There was a lot of broken stuff back then, and I stopped playing as a result of it. But, ironically though, these Rochambeau spells were actually quite alluring to me, as strange as that may sound, because they really made PvP completely different from what it used to be, and I actually came back to the game and to this YouTube channel because I wanted to give this totally new game a shot. That's why I came back, because PvP is totally and completely different from PvE now, and I found that interesting enough to revive this once dead channel. You're probably hearing that and realizing that someone who hated the idea of PvP in the Caramel Age so much that he quit, came back because PvP was so different, puts balancing PvE and PvP at the same time in a very bad spot. And as of late, it's the worst it's ever been. Like, Death, Myth, and Balance are terrorizing the queue, and nerfing them honestly has some scary implications. Like, Wraith needs a nerf badly, but if Drains get nerfed, the PvE community is going to hate that, which I saw firsthand in the comment section on my video last week. For Myth, it's so easy to get a stun combo and just win because the opponent didn't pull stun blocks quick enough, and people have been talking about removing stuns entirely because of that. Like, one of Myth's main spell identities just gone in a snap because of Peeve. You know, like... And then Balance, you know, they have a counter to literally every move that any other school can make in the arena. I even beat the Pendragon the other day by gearheading the overtime into a Troll Detonate on my Balance, which a Balance really should not be able to just do without heavily dipping into other schools' identities. But if they lose too much utility, will Balance still be as useful in a team setting? Because, I mean, even Life, you know, has taken a considerable hit with burst healing, which I'll get into later. Now, of course, the same applies to PvE changes. Like, Death unarguably has the best stats in the entire game because the devs made it a damage and a resist school on the Rochambeau wheel, and their gear was balanced accordingly, which led to it being possible for a Death to beat every single school at max level by just stat diffing and using legacy cards like Poison, and then obviously the infamous Wraith to win trades against high DPP shadow hits. The point is, the devs don't have the best track record with balancing just in general, and with how immense the divide between PvE and PvP has become, it's becoming even harder for them to juggle satisfying both communities. And honestly, if I were them, I would have pulled the plug on trying to juggle the both of them back in 2021 when Rochambeau was coming out, and just separated them entirely. But I do also understand that it would take quite an overhaul to pull off effectively, and I mean, I have my ways that I think I would change and separate the two, but I could get into that in another video. I'm mostly just talking about the, like, what the devs need to do and all that. So that's not to say that they shouldn't try, though, which is what I think has been holding them back a bit. And I think they understand at this point that PvP and PvE are just nothing like one another anymore, and with no new world coming in 2024, this is the best possible time they've gotten since 2019 to separate the two modes once and for all. There's a lot of work to be done, but this is undoubtedly the time to do it and satisfy both communities, and once they do, balancing them separately will become much easier, which will make the game much, much better going forward. If they do decide to spring for it this year, though, there is still the issue of raids, boss rematches, challenge modes, and probably more I'm forgetting, but mostly raids. The three aforementioned activities, as well as PvP, are all considered to be advanced content and follow the same rules, meaning all PvP banned cards are expressly banned in raids, rematches, and challenge mode. And as I've been saying for the last, like, I don't know, half hour, or however long it's been, PvP is far from being the same as the other three, and I think it's cool that there's a use for Rochambeau cards and gambits in these PvE advanced content scenarios, but banning Dragoon AoEs because of raids, for example, should not extend to PvP, and vice versa with cards like the 2-pip shadow hits. You're not hurting other players by using a 1-pip shadow hit, and unbanning some of the cards that were banned because of PvP could open the door for so many new strategies and raids and all that. And in my honest opinion, anything having to do with player versus player should be separate from having anything to do with player versus environment. And this also extends to stat maxes. As I talked about on Thursday, so-called quote-unquote cosplaying desperately needs a nerf in the PvP arena, as there's practically no counterplay aside from momentarily slowing people who do it down, but it's pretty damn essential for certain raid strats, and those strats should not be imperiled by a nerf because of PvP. There was also the burst heal ban, and healing was so overpowered in PvP that the devs rightfully banned a bunch of burst heal cards, but it completely threw off a lot of advanced content strats that revolved around healing, and the Voracious Void strats have changed more this past year than they did the year before, which is really saying something considering it is the older of the two raids now. And best case scenario, you know, this year the developers separate PvP from any and all types of PvE so they can balance the two accordingly to avoid any overlap or breaking anything in one after changing the other. That's just my take on it, though. That's just a theory, team. But yeah, I think that is going to wrap up for now. I could probably touch on what I think I would change about, the separation of PvP and PvE. I know that the devs can do it, they've done it before, but that's for another video. I might make another video following up on this at some point soon, so stay tuned for that. But for the time being, thank y'all for watching. I've been IceGold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm, and I will see y'all later.